last two participants. Mr. Arian Del Rios, you're on. And Dr. Antonio Sison. All right, time check is already 2:51, so I think it will be more appropriate if you are going to start. And I believe that in this session we do have four presenters. One is from Bohol. The title is Bohol Agriculture During the American Occupation: Innovations and Responses by Mr. Idle Paul G. Villamide. And the second will be presented by Ms. Christine S. Batillas from Local to Global, the Globalization of Antiques Muscovado. Antiques Muscovado, I mean. And then the third one will be presented by Mr. Ian Dale Rios, Mangao and Mount Lantoy, the Unseen Treasures of Argao, Cebu. And the last presenter, it will be from Dr. Antonio C. Sison, revisiting Hansen's disease or leprosies from the Spanish colonial, the American Commonwealth, and the COVID-19 pandemic. All right. To start the session, it will be presented or it will be started by Mr. Paul G. Villamide. Currently, he is the Municipal Vice Mayor Silang, Cavite. He holds a bachelor degree, summa cum laude, in Communication Arts from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and a master's degree in anthropology from Ateneo de Manila University. He received a scholarship grant from Nippon Foundation, exchange student grants from the United States of America, and Malaysia fellowship grants from Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and an honorary membership from the International Honor Society of Phi Kappa Phi and International Honor Society of Phi Gamma Mu. He was elected Sangguniang Kabataan Municipal Federation President in 2002, Municipal Councilor in 2013, and Municipal Vice Mayor in 2016 and 2019, currently 2019. He has taught anthropology and sociology and published researches on rural development and local history and culture. He remains passionate about the development of education and the youth and the promotion of the agro-ecotourism and heritage. And today he's going to present regarding the Bohol agriculture during the American occupation, innovations and responses, which this paper aims to attempt to present a history of agriculture in the province of Bohol during the American occupation. So ladies and gentlemen, please hear Mr. Idle Paul G. Villamide. Sir? Sir, I think you're still on mute button.
Okay, sir. Okay na po ba, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Maayong hapon. I am Adel Villamide from Silang, Cavite, and my presentation is titled Bohol Agriculture During American Occupation, Interventions and Responses. My interests in Bohol began when I joined the Ateneo Cultural Laboratory in Baclayon, Luay, Lubok, and Albur in 2012. We documented built heritage properties under the supervision of Dr. Fernando Ziosita. Now my interest has shifted to Bohol agriculture. In my presentation, I intend to present colonial interventions in agriculture of Bohol during the American period and responses of Boholanos to these interventions. I will discuss first Bohol agriculture, including its resources and challenges. Next is the state interventions in Bohol agriculture in terms of infrastructure, social organization, and knowledge dissemination. Finally, I will address the responses of Boholanos to these interventions in terms of accommodation and assertion. Let me begin with Bohol agriculture. Even at the onset, Americans found Bohol agriculture as rich in resources. Bohol's most prominent crops are the following: palay and corn, abaca and maguey, coconuts, fruits, and yams. Palay and corn were the staples. They were grown throughout the province. Coconuts, yam, and fruits such as banana and mango were also grown throughout the province. They were mostly produced for domestic market, but a considerable amount were exported to neighboring islands through bangkas. Abaca and maguey were also produced for fiber, used for home market, but also a considerable amount went to other islands through bangkas. Valencia, Hagna, Dimiao, and Duero were prominent for abaca, while Albur, Dimiao, Loay, and Baclayon were prominent for maguey. Bohol also produced craft. Boholanos weaved mats and hats from tikog, bugang, buri, amorseco, and cane. They also manufactured textile from banana and ugpak. Baclayon, Lubok, Dimiao, Valencia, Garcia Hernandez, Hagna, Duero, and Sevilla was known for saba sinamay, while Talibon was known for tikugmat. Aside from textile mats and hats, Boholanos also produced salt, especially in Luay. They produce salt by evaporation of seawater. Nonetheless, Americans recognize the challenges to Bohol agriculture. These challenges are environmental and infrastructural. Episodic epidemia like rinderpests and foot and mouth disease decimated livestock, while natural calamities like drought and strong typhoons ravaged farms. Road network was poor, methods were a bit inefficient, implements were ineffective, and draft animals were lacking. In response to these resources and challenges, the colonial state implemented certain interventions in agriculture. These interventions are mostly on infrastructure, social organization, and knowledge dissemination. Let me talk about first infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, the colonial state provided seeds and seedlings of good quality, modern tools and machines. For instance, in 1912, there was a sugar factory in Tubigon. And the colonial state also encouraged the use of cattle as draft animal. The state also constructed roads and bridges in order to connect towns across the island, irrigation facilities, and developed the ports in Tagbilaran and Maribohok. The colonial state also encouraged the formation of cooperative associations based on the culture of Hongasay. There are three kinds of cooperative associations present in the province during American occupation. These three are the following: Cooperative Labor Association, Cooperative Financial Association, and Cooperative Charitable Association. In Cooperative Labor Association, members provided labor for planting, cultivating, and harvesting crops, weaving and knotting, and building and repairing houses. In Cooperative Financial Association, members contributed money on the installment plan and received in a single sum the total sum of their contributions. In Cooperative Charitable Association, members contributed labor, money, or food to those who are actually in need, especially during times of disaster or when they are in grief. The colonial state also disseminated knowledge in the form of model or demonstration farms, publications, and lectures. Farmers were encouraged to enlist their farms as model or demonstration farms. These enlisted model or demonstration farms, like what is shown in the picture, were assisted and supervised by the Bureau of Agriculture. They were provided with technical and other forms of assistance, like seeds and seedlings of good quality and new tools. The colonial state also produced guides to crop cultivation. Some of these guides or publications were in Boholano, and these were widely disseminated among farmers. Lectures were also conducted on agricultural production and entrepreneurship or agribusiness. In general, the colonial state wanted to propagate a certain ethic which is characteristic of Western consciousness, certain proclivity to effectivity and efficiency. In the words of Louis E. Glick, the Commission's prescription for an improved agriculture acknowledged theoretically that there were a myriad of variables involved, but reduced them, broadly speaking, to exclusively rational elements. So there was an intent to propagate the ethic of rationality, identifying the best system of cultivation and the best crops for each area, the most effective and economical agricultural methods, and the maximization of the net profit of the farmer. Boholanos accepted these colonial agricultural innovations. The cultivation of maguey and the use of cattle as draft animal were cases in point. Let me discuss these cases one by one. First, the case of cultivation of maguey. Boholanos cultivated maguey even before the Americans came, but the species that they were planting was Agave-Cantala. When the Americans came to introduce one species, which they call sisal, the Boholanos adopted it and began planting this species. Next, case of cattle. I mentioned a while ago that one of the biggest problems in Bohol's agriculture during American occupation was the lack of draft animals. Two were causes. One, the episodic epidemic of reindeer pests, and number two, war. When the war ended in 1902, the American soldiers, in retaliation and anger, killed carabaos, cows, and horses, and drained their blood in rivers and streams. They were so angry that they did it. Hence, few years passed, farmers found no beast that they can use in plowing their field. In response to this problem, the colonial state encouraged the use of cows instead of carabaos as draft animals. Boholanos followed. Nonetheless, Boholanos did not just accommodate these colonial interventions. They did not just simply accept these colonial interventions. They also asserted their culture, their own character, their own produce, and their own system of production. In fact, Bohol at that time was considered a major mango, maguey, and coconut producing province. Boholanas were also commended for their methods of rice cultivation. In an essay written by E.F. Southwick in Philippine Agricultural Review, he said, "The preparation of a soil before the pala is planted is very thorough, and could a farmer be induced to prepare his cornfield in a like manner, the resulting crop would tell a very different story. The best irrigation system on the island is in Lila. This consists of a considerable area of land irrigated by water, obtained from a constantly flowing spring in the hills. Emphasis on very thorough." Aside from this, Boholanos were also recognized in terms of agricultural leadership. Salvador Enriquez, a Boholano, was one of the 72 delegates who attended the first agricultural conferences of the Philippine Carnival in 1910. At the end of the conference, he was elected vice president of the Insular Agricultural Association of the Philippine Islands. Aside from this, Boholanos participated in agricultural exhibits and won awards for their produce. Consider the following. This is the list of the awardees at the first Philippine Exposition from the province of Bohol. Not just one, but several Boholanos won awards. For instance, Catalino Casinias was the first in terms of best 5 seed nuts, first best pickle of copra, second in most copra from one nut. Severino Claren or Severino Clarin was also received a honorable mention for best exhibit in sweet potato. Felipe Saspon was the first in the best exhibit for yam. Pablo Ligones was the first in terms of best sample arrowroot starch. And these awards were received by these Boholanos at the first Philippine Exposition. Perhaps the highest recognition that Boholanos received during this time was on their superior industry. These are the words of Henry Miller, published in one of the textbooks on Philippine economy. He said, with the exception of a few people, such as the Ilocanos and the Boholanos, the pioneer spirit has been lacking among the Filipinos. The difference in the individuality of peasant proprietors is especially noticeable when industrious peoples like Boholanos or Ilocanos settle among an indolent population. Boholanos were recognized not just for their produce, not just for their production system, but because of their character, their industry, their superior industry. In conclusion, we can say the following. First, on colonial interventions. Indeed, the colonial state made colonial interventions in the agriculture of Bohol. But these colonial interventions were based on existing natural and cultural resources. The seedlings and the seeds that they gave were basically the seeds and seedlings of the resources that they found out when they occupied Bohol in 1902. The cooperative associations were based on the existing culture of Boholano, which is homosai. In terms of local responses, we can say that Boholanos indeed accepted the colonial interventions, but they also asserted their own natural and cultural systems. They asserted their character, their produce, and their own system of production. In the end, we can say this about colonial agricultural transformation. What happens in agricultural transformation in colonial context is not just a one-way process of influence. Instead, the process can be said as dialectical or dialogic. It is a mutual exchange. One affects the other, one communicates the other. The output is a combination, a fusion of two diverging cultures, two diverging influences. Thank you at magandang hapon po sa ating lahat.
All right, thank you for the comprehensive presentation, Mr. Villamide. And before that, we are going to proceed to the next speaker. Let me just remind the participants that you can raise your questions. You can even chat your questions to the chat box. And all questions will be entertained only after the presentation, only after the 4 presentations of the speakers. Now, to our next speaker, by the way, she's from Silliman University, Miss Christine Batillas. Is originally from Bacolod City, Negros Occidental, but ancestry is from Iloilo and Antique. She started teaching anthropology and sociology subjects at Silliman University from 2007 until today. Special interest is the medicine, folklore, anthropology of food, and museology, while research experiences focus on rural communities and social conditions in Negros. She is a member of Central Visayas Associations of Museum, Incorporated, and has been an assistant curator of Silliman University Anthropology Museum for almost 10 years. She also served for 3 years as a national trainer for Private Education Assistance Committee during the early implementation of senior high school in the country. Currently, she serves as the chairperson of the Anthropology Sociology Department of Silliman University. And she's going to present the title From Local to Global, the Globalization of Antiques Muscovado, which is, if all of us are familiar with, if we are familiar with it, this is the sugar played a significant role in connecting Philippines and Panay Islands to the world. Now the paper is trying to identify the 3 important periods of development in the sugar industry, specifically showing the impact of foreign actors affecting the productions and distribution. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Christine Batillas, going to present From Local to Global, the Globalization of Antiques Muscovado.
Thank you very much, Sir Andrew. Should I put this in full screen, sir?
Yeah, I think it will be much better.
Okay, sige, sir. So once again, thank you very much, Sir Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone, to all the participants and as well as to my co-presenters. And for those who speak Karaya, mayad na hapon sa aton tanan. So my presentation today will be about the Muscovado sugar industry of Antique. So the title of my presentation is From Local to Global, the Globalization of Antiques Muscovado. So to start, food is considered to be fundamental for all animal species, including humans. So for our survival, we definitely need food. So food in general, as things evolved, it's not anymore just for the satisfaction of our hunger, but later on it evolved into something symbolic as well. Symbolic that it identifies a person's status, gender, ethnicity, and even the age of a particular person. It can also be identified through its procurement or through the food that it eats. So as humans further advance its desire to, sorry, let me return back. So as humans further advance its desire to improve the production of goods, more people around the world are further linked to the expansion of the economic and social relations among different countries and cultures. So definitely societies today there are no more societies that can be considered left untouched by the phenomenon of globalization, and especially the food industry or the food businesses have definitely benefited from the various innovations when it comes to the technology, and especially when it comes to the communication and transportation. So basically, my presentation this afternoon will look into two questions, and the presentation will also be somehow divided into two major parts. So these questions are, first, how did colonization influence the development of the sugar industry in the Philippines, specifically in the Western Visayas? Second, what changes did global trends contribute to the revival of Muscovado sugar industry in Antique? So basically, the part one of my presentation will look into the colonization period and the development of the sugar industry in the Philippines. And part two will look at the contemporary period. Now, I will be discussing about the global trends and as well as some sort of personal experiences when it comes to Muscovado and the effects of these global actors to the industry as a whole. So looking at my uh, my presentation this afternoon is an ongoing process. It's still under its preliminary stage. Generally, this is an ethnographic study that utilizes various procedures. And for the first part of our discussion, I'll be utilizing information coming from historical written accounts or literatures about the sugar industry in the Philippines. And then the second part will definitely look into the data coming from some government records about the Muscovado industry. My initial ocular surveys or informal discussions with various peoples, including the farmers, mill owners, managers, and definitely the uh, consumers in the community or in Antique. So as I've mentioned that this particular presentation is something considered to be personal to me because my ancestry or my mother from my mother's side comes from Antique, and I have in a way I have immersed myself with this particular topic since I was still quite small. But of course, as an anthropologist, I see Muscovado now differently compared to when I was little. But particularly, the data that I will be discussing this afternoon will be based on three particular municipalities in Antique, namely San Jose de Buenavista, Bilison, and Lawaan. Why San Jose de Buenavista? Because my ancestry comes from this particular municipality. Bilison is specifically the research site of my research, while Lawaan is considered to be the capital of the Muscovado industry of Antique. So let's try to look at the periods of development. Now, sugar, why is it that sugar is considered to be something that I am interested with? If you try to look into the various types or kinds of taste, sweetness is considered to be something that most humans really crave for. So they said that we evolved to really crave for something that is sweet. So it is said that in history that sugarcane um, comes from or was originally domesticated somewhere in Papua New Guinea, and later on through migration it was brought to the Philippines, certain parts of Southeast Asia, and eventually it reached India. Uh, and where it was fully, let's just say, the Indians developed various ways to really increase the productivity of or to create a sugar industry. That is why the name or the word sugar somehow is associated with the Indian Sanskrit word sakara. Now, my research is based on the Muscovado sugar, which is considered to be the very original or the very first type or the very first sugar that was produced. This is a non-centrifugal sugar, or it's an unrefined sugar, plainly made by boiling sugarcane juice, and to after boiling, it will just be left to evaporate on a certain space or on a certain surface. Later on, it will be crystallized, and then you will have what we call as the muscovado sugar. So let us try to look at the first initial period of the development of the sugar industry in the country. So based on certain accounts, let's say, for example, Pigafetta has mentioned sugarcane or tubo as one of the many products cultivated by the early Filipinos, and it's usually served as a refreshment. They were served sugarcane when they visited various places here in the Visayas. I think in Cebu, I'm not really quite sure, but I think they were served sugarcane as refreshment. And then they also encountered sugarcane as one of the important products that was considered as part of the ransom for the Pulawan governor that they have kidnapped back then. Now, it was also mentioned by some authors that wine made from sugar was quite common in the Philippines at that time. So if you can think of a wine coming from sugar, think about the wine from the northern Luzon, let's say, for example, Basi. But Larkin mentioned in his book that sugar making was not necessarily present prior to the Spanish period, but it was actually associated or is associated with the development. Its development was associated with the Chinese influence in the Philippines. It's kind of really quite unusual that early Filipinos are already making wine from sugar, but they are not making sugar, what you call it, sugar from sugar cane. It might be possible that they've been making sugar out of sugar cane even prior to the coming of the Spaniards is because of the presence of the Chinese. If sugar is associated with the Chinese, so therefore the presence of these Chinese traders might have actually started the sugar industry even prior to the coming of the Spanish people. So it is said that at the time of the Spanish colonization, um, the use of stone rollers were introduced again by the Chinese. These are used to crush the sugar cane to release the juice, and then the juice is also boiled in earthenwares in the earlier period. But then again, later on, the Chinese introduced the use of the kawa, what you call this, the iron that is much more sturdier compared to the earthenwares, because earthenwares can easily break if exposed to the heat for a much longer period. So in this case, certain areas in the Philippines, and it was mentioned by Larkin that Sara, Iloilo is where sugar was commercially grown uh, in the 19th century. But unfortunately, during the Spanish period, the sugar industry was never given enough attention to develop. So it was encouraged because there are already a lot of plantation all over the archipelago at the time of the Spanish colonization, but sugar that was produced mainly traded by the Chinese traders are locally consumed only. So probably the reason why the Spaniards were not interested with exporting sugar, it's because they are much more focused on the exportation of the Chinese ceramics and silk in the galleon trade. And of course, if you can recall our history, the Caribbean is already producing sugar back then, and the Caribbean is much more, let's just say, much more nearer in Europe, nearer to Europe compared to the Philippines. So the importation of sugar actually started when Manila ports opened to foreign shipping in 1785. But unfortunately, it's not as developed then, because only Asian ships and Asian goods were actually um, traded during this time. Prior to this time, sugar from the Philippines reached foreign shores, mostly oftentimes through illegal transactions. So by most oftentimes illegal transactions would mean bribing of some officials that would lead to, again, the bringing out of the sugar to other places in the world or into the international markets. But in 1834, the Manila ports were actually fully open to foreign trade. And because of this, a lot of firms, foreign firms, especially American and European firms, mostly British firms, established their offices in Manila. And many of them are really quite interested with sugar, or to import or I mean to export sugar to Europe at that time. And one of the individuals that came to the Philippines is an English man from Plymouth who is known as Nicholas Looney. Looney is considered to be a very important personality to the development of the sugar industry in the Philippines. So in the mid 1850s, or in the 1850s, mid 1900s, sugar is on the rise in Europe. So sugar demand is rising. It's probably because due to the increase in the way of life of the people, especially in England. So you have the middle class now growing in number, and because of this, they are now capable of buying sugar more. So there's this great demand. So the British consul, through its representative Nicholas Looney, opened the opportunities to foreigners to explore the islands outside of Manila for trading. So Looney was sent to Iloilo, and then he saw that sugar has a great potential to be um, to be a product that can be exported to England, especially. Even though back then Iloilo was known as a weaving industry, while in the other hand, rice and corn are much more popular crops being produced compared to sugar, which is actually only a third or fourth good exported out of Iloilo. So prior to these improvements brought by Looney to Western Visayas, especially in Iloilo, so Western Visayas sugar was considered to be of low quality because the prominent places where sugar was produced is in Luzon, let's say for example Pampanga and Pangasinan. So Iloilo, Capiz, Antique, Negros, and Cebu, sugar are considered to be much of low quality and cheaper. So sometimes they mix the sugar, Pampanga sugar from 1 minute only, sir. Okay, so wait, sorry. So Looney also became a catalyst for the needed improvements of the sugar industry in the Panay. So I'll just go through with this. He provides capital to farmers, introduced new machines from England to Scotland, introduced higher yielding sugar cane from Sumatra, improved business transactions in Iloilo, and Looney also introduced direct trading from Iloilo to England. So in the 20th century, we also saw the decline of the sugar industry when Looney was not anymore there. So not much development happened because of this. So probably it's due to, again, the lack of the drive of the people, especially the hacenderos in Panay and in Negros, and as well as some new players came as well, like say for example new global players like Hawaii and Australia. Now, as again as an important commodity, Muscovado is considered to be an industry that is mostly known to be produced in Antique. So I'll just go through the reason why the Muscovado is now considered to be an important industry for Antique because of the time constraints. So global trends, recent studies on health and food show that especially for global actors that are belonging to the what you call this consumers, especially from developed countries, saw that they need to improve their health, and they also are considered to be much more into ethical concerns of where the food come from. So basically, these are some of the factors that led to the creation for a new product or creation for looking for new alternatives. And Muscovado has seen to be something that can I have at least 2 more minutes, sir? Pwede? 2 more minutes. So what is now the role of Antique and then Antique and its relationship with the international markets. So as you can see here, developed countries, they have this desire to get more resources from particular places, let's say for example from peripheral countries or agricultural countries, because they cannot produce this particular products, say for example the Muscovado. But unfortunately, countries like the Philippines and especially Antique does not have the capacity to produce these products in greater quantity because they lack the technology. So obviously what happens here is that the countries that are developed will provide the technology, and the product that will be produced in Antique will be sent to these particular countries. So the effects of global trends to Antique farmers and millers is shown through this, that most nowadays there are various millers or cooperatives that are actually producing Muscovado solely for exportation to, for example, Korea. So what they're doing is they are trying to create a higher quality Muscovado that are actually competitive and is actually following the protocols of fair trade. And because of this, they have actually gained more improvement in terms of the way of life of the people. But of course, there are also certain drawbacks. Let's say, for example, the difficulty of really maintaining that quality. And unfortunately, although there is what you call this, the government is also giving them support, but it's not necessarily enough. The support from these particular international actors or international cooperatives are really very important to really drive the industry to the develop. So as you can see here, these are actually the two types of Muscovado mills now commonly found in Antique. So as you can see in the left side, this is the traditional one that it's still quite common that you can find. So this is an open Muscovado mills, and of course the Muscovado that they will produce is only for local consumption. While in the other hand, the Muscovado mill that you can see here on the upper side is the now much more high-tech Muscovado mills that the products here will be sent off to markets in the international markets. So I guess I will just have to end my discussion here because of the time constraint. So dagang salamat, sir. And anyway, I think will this be available as well to the participants?
Yes, will be
Yeah,
available. It will be much better if you're going to share with your slides. And
yeah,
most likely, I think you will be able to discuss some of these matters during the question and answer
yeah.
portion.
Sorry about that, sir.
Okay, okay, it's okay. All
Thank
right,
you.
you're welcome. All right, for our next speaker, he will be presenting. Wait, he will be presenting the Mangao and let's call this one. And I was even surprised with his photos. The photo that he presented. This is the title. The title of his presentation will be about the Mangao and the Mount Lantoy, the unseen treasures of Argao, Cebu. And basically, the highlights of this paper display the interactions between the people and the natural world, which has forged a pre-Christian cultural identity that epitomizes the harmonious environment, a human-environment relationship. Right? And then it will be presented by Mr. Ian Del Rios, earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology, majoring in archaeology and cultural heritage management track from the University of San Carlos, Cebu City, Philippines. He has had engagement in archaeological field schools, social and anthropological research, and environmental conservation projects in the Philippines, and outdoor adventure experiential learning programs in Hong Kong. Most of his work are Most of his works are drawn from his intimate interest in preserving the intangible cultural heritage and the natural world. He now works as a part-time college instructor for the social sciences at the Cebu Technological University San Francisco campus. He seeks to continue his Master of Arts in Anthropology at the University of San Carlos. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ian Dale Rios.
Hi sa tanan. Pwede na ako mag-share screen, sir?
Sure, okay na ba?
Share. Can you hear me? Do you see what I see?
So far, pa. Adi, padung ang tingali.
Okay.
Aka na, nana.
All right. So you're seeing, okay. Okay.
It will be okay.
All right, so okay na? Okay, Tara. Can you hear me?
Yes, kita na and we can hear you.
Okay, that's all right. Mayang hapon sa tanan. Ako di ay si Ian Del Rios. Thank you for this opportunity to present my study entitled Mangao and Mount Lantoy, the Unseen Treasures of Argao, Cebu. Now, before I begin, I'd like to share a beautiful line from the author of The Little Prince. Yes, the house, the stars, the desert, what gives them their beauty is something invisible, yeah? I don't know if you've heard of this, but a pre-Christian deity persists in the mountain barangays of Argao amid the growth of modernization and westernization in Cebu. He has a name, he's Mangao, a forest and agricultural deity. This is a brief study that looks into the interactions between nature and culture that had forged a local cultural identity that is harmonious with the natural environment. This study also looks into the encounter of such local beliefs with the Christian religion introduced by our Spanish conquistadors. First off, Mount Lantoy is a key biodiversity area which is home to a number of endemic plant and animal species. But I'm here to present how Mount Lantoy is treasure trove of not only natural resources but also of cultural resources and values as well. And Mount Lantoy archives the pre-Christian cultural identity of our forebears that illustrates their harmonious relationship with the natural world. It is an intangible cultural heritage that is in danger of disappearing due to a number of factors. There is this need to understand the importance of the intangible heritage values in managing landscapes and preserving the Filipino cultural identity. This study seeks to document the local cultural significance of Mangao as embedded in the local folklore based on the narratives, personal experiences, and memories of the people in a farming sub-village in Argao. We'll focus on the belief in the supernatural, folk narratives, and rituals and practices. Basically, this is an exploration into the associative cultural values of Mount Lantoy. And there has already been studies. Alboro and Seki have stated that Mount Lantoy is a especially distinctive spatial reference of the legend of Mangao. And according to Amper, Mangao is an entity who lives in Mount Lantoy, a sacred site. But really, I find similar texts very rare. My data are largely based on qualitative research methods, primarily in-depth formal interviews. Initially, I did convenience sampling, and then afterwards, I did snowball sampling. I have 7 respondents, all Lumad or native. They range from middle to old ages, and they are primarily farmers. And informal interviews, deep hanging out, and field observations were also done in the farming community. Knowledge acquired from books, mass media, or information and programs propagated by the local government and other institutions are carefully sifted as not part of the data, strictly unwritten local traditional knowledge. Argao is located right here. It's the southeast of Cebu. It is also a well-cited spatial reference for a number of popular Visayan folk narratives, such as Pang-Aghamtao, the borrowing folktale, and the legend of the golden boats. Mount Nanto is most accessible in Sitio Cabalawan, Barangay Tabayag. It is a relatively dry, rain-fed, a known agricultural community that mainly produces corn. It is 45 minutes away from the poblacion by Cabalhabal. Yes, Mount Nantoy stands right here at the heart of Argao's rough interior. It's just right by the Argao River. This is the shallow portion of the Argao River. This is my first time to visit in Argao back in 2008. Let's go to the heart of the study. Belief in the supernatural. Interestingly, folk belief pertaining to the natural environment always involve the coexistence of the human in the supernatural worlds. And it is valued among the locals who repeat the natural environment as a vital source of their livelihood and way of living. Like mountains, forests, rivers, trees, subsistence crops, and caves and pits. Essentially, this is the anchor point for the other forms of local folklore. That is, I point out, if you rewire a belief system, you will really mess up one's culture. So the locals believe in the unseen supernatural beings, the nature spirits, or locally called Diwata, or Inkantohanon. They also believe that tree dwellers. These are Inkantohanon that inhabit the huge and old trees. They are known to help people and are quite beneficial in some cases, but can cause illnesses or worse, death to those who recklessly cut dead trees without performing rituals. They also believe in the guardians of good harvests. They are Inkantohanons believed to protect the cornfields away from the worms and other pests. Their presence ensure a successful harvest. It is commonly believed that Mangao is said to be the principal guardian of good harvests, who lives in Mount Nantoy. That's why his name is always heard during sacred agricultural rituals. Agricultural rituals must be observed seriously. Otherwise, misfortunes might happen. It's very sacred. Let's go to the rituals and practices. Rituals is generally called pangamuyo. I believe its root word is puyo, which means to live, to dwell. Other similar verbs, diwataan and gulutan. It is primarily performed to communicate with the supernatural beings. And usually halat or food offering, food is offered to the Inkantohanon, essentially anchored to the belief in the supernatural. It holds various purposes in society. Hiso is one of the halad for good harvests. It is to ensure a good one. It's performed during the season when the corn begins to bear flowers like kanamubanay ba. A chicken or two are killed to be sacrificed as offerings. The mangamuyo, or the ritualist, performs the libut-libut. He walks around the cornfield a number of times and spills the blood extracted from the sacrificed chickens on all corners of the farmland. After the performance, people usually feast on the food offerings. Another is the panuig. It is a pahalipay in a pasalamat to the Inkantohanon after a successful harvest. It's similar to hisa, but more food is prepared. A table is laid with young banana leaves where mais kanon or staple corn is served over. If your product is rice, then serve rice. 4 sacrificial chickens are torn into pieces and laid on top of the mais kanon. Sounds familiar? It has to be cooked but unsalted. Sampit-sampit, the mangamuyo recites speeches that cannot be understood, invoking mangaw. The sampit-sampit should not be disclosed. Otherwise, misfortunes might happen. So, literally a handful of food offerings are tossed to the eastern and western sides of the farmland. This is intended for those Inkantohanon who were late during the main ritual. After the performance, people may feast on the food offerings to celebrate and give thanks for a grace of a successful harvest. They also have the tree-cutting ritual. Mga muyug yun kung patulog kahoy, ngayog tabi, hinginlan, mananghid. One of my LS informants shares some of his lines before he cuts down a tree. Kining kahoya akong gihigugma, ug akong gamiton og putlon. Pananglit, kung nain nagpuyot, pahawa ka mo kay ugma, ako ning gamito ng putlon. At sa, kung mahulog, di putlon. Kung di, putlon ko. So, this is how it works. Hack the tree with a hatchet, one that is heavy enough to penetrate the trunk. Watch over the jammed hatchet for about 3 to 4 hours. If the hatchet falls, the request is denied. If it remains jammed, the dweller agrees to move to another tree and permits the tree to be cut down. Now imagine, if we all do this, logging companies would not want this, would they? Folk narratives are mostly legends and folk tales. It is said that Marikakao and Manga are couples who both live in Mount Lantoy. And they have cried when the trees in Mount Lantoy have been intentionally burned. And the popular Cebuano tale with the borrowing motif is also associated. The tale with the borrowing motif is associated to the caves and pits in Cabulao in Mount Lantoy, also referred to as Hulmanan, literally a venue where people can borrow items, like plates, cooking utensils, wedding gowns, and the likes. There was one instance when the borrowed item was shattered. From that moment on, not a single item has been lent to anyone else. It is said that couples Maria Kakao and Mangaw own the Hulmanan. This served as a vehicle that carries and sustains important socio-cultural values and belief systems from one generation to the next, the value of Manghuam. Local folklore are learned and transmitted from generation through word of mouth or demonstration and imitation. It's unwritten, it's local, and traditional. Sinunod lang gid ni, ginikanan pa sa ginikanan. However, it is still subject to discontinuity, and there are a combination of factors. The younger generations are unwilling listeners and never believers. It is deemed economically impractical, especially those who no longer farm the land. Government regulations that restrict subsistence agricultural activities also means a restriction of traditional agricultural practices. Urban migration, in exchange for employment in the industrial world, they have left their land with only their time-worn parents to maintain it. Wala na nahabilin, puro na nga tong syudad. But among all factors, Christian evangelization, the religion introduced by the Spanish colonizers, had the most significant impact. Wala na ko ng pangamuyo, kaya seminar naman ko sa charismatic. Ang uban, uwang bakong tubo, dilit na mo tuo, kay higanda ng Diyos, Satanas. It's been reduced to totoo or mere superstition, stripped off its local cultural values. But not all. Some may have learned the local value of these rituals, but they go against the rest regarded as demonic and still joins the feast after the panuig is performed. Despite widespread evaluation, the elder farmers still do the rituals and practices, but in concealment. Di na may matug-an kay samok. Ang panuig, iatol na lang og pista, og dili na mabanha kay mas po ang pari. My informant eventually discloses and then chuckles. Sadly, the encounter of local belief with the introduced Christian religion of the colonizers has preceded the suppression of the former. Yep, until now, suppression of local cultural identities, a colonial weapon, still lives in the 21st century. Local belief system and practices that are clearly in harmony with nature is devaluated, demonized, and suppressed. Ang panuig, iatol og pista. Pista is a practice accepted by the Catholic Church where it entails the veneration of patron saints. The natives responded by concealing their local culture behind it for the sake of continuity. Now, this study allows us to have a better understanding of how peoples perceive, interact, and value the natural environment. Argos Montanto is a fascinating subject for conservation for its richness in cultural and natural resources and values. Considering the present-day environmental challenges and the almost complete deforestation of Cebu Island, just partly led to the extinction of many native trees, birds, and other wildlife. Emphasizing the intangible cultural heritage aspect only strengthens the conservation significance on top of its ecological values, reverberating the inseparability of culture and nature. Moreover, reducing these integral components of cultural heritage as mere superstition and demonizing it disowns and insults the indigenous Filipino cultural identity towards the natural environment and mocks the harmonious relationship between the humankind and the natural world. According to Father Francisco Demetrio, one cannot fully agree with the early Christian chroniclers who claimed that religion of the early Filipinos was altogether diabolical what had served the needs of the people for long centuries before the advent of Christianity cannot, in fairness and truth, be called the work of the devil, pure and simple. Now, there is an urgency to promote and revitalize our local intangible cultural heritage that is reverent to the natural world and expressive of sustainable use of resources. The importance of an integrated conservation management plan that safeguards both cultural and natural resources, the convergence of the natural and social sciences. This paper hopes to provide anthropological insights to conservationists and local authorities in Argao in managing and strengthening the conservation of landscapes. Mount Antoy, where Mango lives, I put forward, is potentially an immovable national cultural treasure. Of course, we need further extensive studies. Salamat. And I would also like to thank these guys for supporting my research, going along with me inside Baguio. And this is, I collaborated with a painting student from USC, Reginaldo Cañete Caintic. This is his rendition of Mangaw. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ian, for such a comprehensive presentations regarding about the Mangaw and the hidden treasure of Argao. All right, for our next from Mangaw and Mount Lantoy, we will now be going to the revisiting Hansen's disease, leprosy, from Spanish colonial and the American Commonwealth and the COVID-19 pandemic. And this will be presented by Mr. Antonio Sison. Okay. And just to give a background, Dr. Antonio Sison is the first and only board-certified psychiatrist and board-certified dermatologist in the Philippines. The reason for this dual residency is his interest in the pursuing the field of psychodermatology, focusing on the interplay between the brain and skin. Presently, he is associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, UPPGH. He is a consultant at the Skin and Cancer Foundation Incorporated. Ladies and gentlemen, please listen to Dr. Antonio C. Sison.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that kind introduction. This afternoon, I'm going to lecture on revisiting Hansen's disease, leprosy, from the Spanish colonial, the American Commonwealth, up to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is my disclosure. My lecture outline will be as follows. In this interesting article, they mentioned Dr. Nina G. Jablonski had said that human skin is an anthropologist's map. And I would say, yes, indeed, the skin is an anthropologist's map because it tells the story of human connection, referring to the we, but it also tells the story of human rejection, referring to others, and that others includes people with skin conditions like leprosy. Let us now talk about key facts on leprosy. It is an infectious disease caused by a bacillus, Mycobacterium leprae. Disease mainly affects the skin, peripheral nerves, the upper respiratory tract, as well as the eyes. And it is transmitted via droplets from the nose and mouth during close and frequent contacts. Untreated leprosy can be progressive and cause permanent damage, as you can see here. The treatment of leprosy is a multi-drug therapy, which consists of 3 different antibiotics. The dosing can be adjusted depending on the age group and typically lasts between 6 months to 1 year or over a year, depending on the stage of the disease. Let's now think of the overview of leprosy. In most of the world, leprosy is largely considered a disease of the past. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, leprosy was eliminated as a global health problem in 2000 because it has a prevalence of less than 1 case per 10,000 people. However, one of the few remaining places where the disease remains an elevated public concern is the Philippines. My question is, why would leprosy, a potentially curable disease, already controlled in some countries, still continue to be a concern in the Philippines. These are the different medical anthropological approaches, and most of them actually focus on the person with leprosy. I'm not an anthropologist, so I'll be taking a different approach. I will be revisiting leprosy from a historical perspective, highlighting medical, social, legal, and spiritual factors. In this first table, medical factors of leprosy, you would see on the first row, you will see medical factors and all the different stages from pre-Spanish, Spanish, American, up to independence, up to the COVID pandemic. And on the left column, you see causative, treatment, and cure medical factors. You can see that from initially viewing leprosy as divine punishment, actually came into the scientific world upon the identification of the microbacterium leprae. Further, because of this identification of this bacteria, they were eventually able to develop a multi-drug therapy that is effective. And therefore, you see the shift from non-curable, incurable, to a disease that is curable. Looking at the social factors, you could see here in terms of practices, people with leprosy, even from the pre-Spanish times, were already segregated and isolated. And this was even heightened some more during the Spanish period. And the development during the American period was Culion, which is considered as the leper colony. Additionally, what is significant for the Visayas is the development of two other institutions, namely Santa Barbara in Iloilo and Eversley Child in Cebu. You see then that coinciding with a more scientific approach for leprosy, this segregation has actually changed and shifted. In fact, they will only be admitted upon special cases. Furthermore, you would see here that in terms of the legal dimension, that what was originally spiritual, which indeed the Franciscan order actually was very much in the forefront, when the care shifted to government, that is now when several bills related to leprosy were done. In terms of the discovery of Microbacterium leprae, the effective use of multi-drug therapy for leprosy had caused shift from leprosarium to community-based treatment, from segregation to desegregation. But even with these developments, why would leprosy still be a major concern in our country? What are the other factors to consider? One clue would be in terms of our language. These are the words to describe leprosy, and certainly calling somebody with this is not very pleasing. Further, as a result of this, we really have to understand further risk factors of stigma related to leprosy. And in this particular article, had suggested stigma reduction strategies as well as part of the plan. As you can see here, the vicious cycle of stigma. But then again, I realize, is this just it? Maybe I'm asking the wrong question. Compared to other patient groups who are very active politically in pushing for their agenda, why are persons with leprosy not actively participating for education and their understanding for leprosy? And perhaps one way of viewing this is to view the cohort of persons with leprosy and their family within the lens of intergenerational trauma. I would like to show you picture archives from the Cologne Museum and Archives. Here is where they have forcibly gathered people with leprosy and to be gathered and to be eventually placed in Culion. Here is actually the streamer as they are waiting to be transported. Remember, this was an edict. It was not something they could fight. This was actually law. And this is how it is when they arrived in Culion. And upon arrival, just as like we're experiencing today, there is quarantine. I would like to present the trauma view of leprosy. Leprosy is a dermatological condition, not just a traumatizing condition, but a continually traumatizing condition experienced from segments of society in various degrees of rejection and isolation each day. Trauma impacts on the mental well-being. And with the history of the leper colony, leprosaria, this population may experience collective trauma. And as you know, collective trauma may cause disruptions in social interactions within social groups. An individual with trauma may develop conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, which could be through epigenetic changes may be passed on genetically to the next generation. So when I was reflecting on this, we are not just dealing with leprosy per se, but also with trauma, with stigma, and possible mental conditions. So let us not just treat the lesion, but let us also listen to their stories. And these are two books which I would like to share with you. The Leper Spy, a Filipina with leprosy who was awarded the highest award to a civilian. And this other very good book, Hidden Lives Concealed, The History of Leprosy, a very wonderful book on the history of leprosy in our country. So using the framework of leprosy that includes stigma, trauma, and possible mental health issues, we may now develop new platforms of intervention and monitoring progress of this condition. These are my references. And yes, skin is an anthropologist's map, but hopefully with all of us working together now, we now would include person with leprosy in the we. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you, Dr. Susan, for the enlightening information that you have given to us, especially to the participants. And now we are going to open the table for the open forum, or for those who have any questions, please use the chat box so that I will be able to relay the message or the question to the presenters. And I have a question here, which came from Jesse Varquez, and this is intended for Christine because he was interested in the classic ethnography, Sweetness and Power by Sidney Mintz, which basically it will relate much of your study. So the question of Jesse will be, can you talk more about political economy of sugar in Antique?
Okay, so thank you for that. Basically, my research really doesn't really look into the political economy of sugar, but then again, we cannot help but discuss it as well. As I was not able to discuss about the decline of the Muscovado sugar industry, actually one of the reasons why it declined is also the lack of support from the government as well. So basically, the industry, as we have seen through since the Spanish period, the lack of support from the government actually led to its decline, and even up to today the importance of the support from the local government really plays a vital role when it comes to the development of the industry. But unfortunately, if you know about Antique, Antique is not that rich when it comes to in terms of economy. And that is one of the main reasons why many people from Antique usually will migrate to other provinces in Western Visayas. And what was left there is the Muscovado industry left in decline because, again, many of the people left Muscovado industry as well because it's not anymore very productive as well for them. So they would rather look for other ways of looking for financial stability rather than pursuing the Muscovado. So right now, as I have mentioned, that really the push for more support from the government really plays a vital role in terms of revitalizing the Muscovado sugar industry in Antique.
All right, thank you for that, Christine. And I think I have another question here. This is in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, This is intended for Idol Paul Benabide, and I think also for Ms. Batillas, that according to him, that it is understandable that our thinkers during the late 19th and 20th centuries were so focused in decolonizing the Filipino intellectual tradition kasi medyo fresh pang collective memory. So, sa kanya, he was asking that, how about now? How did our theorizing change through time? Ano ang mga changes or more of merging of foreign and local paradigms? Hence, globalization, more embracing or reclaiming our painful colonial roots?
Should I answer or si Sir Serious?
If Mr. Bilamidi will be available, so he can immediately give his answer. Ms. Batiles, you can go ahead.
Oh, again, we cannot really help but also look back at what happened in the past. And of course, colonization plays a vital role when it comes to defining the history. But as people in the present today, we are looking at new things. So we have different perspective and we can actually look into the things that they saw back in the past and try to see whether it's really fitting into our own narratives, because we today as people in the present, we're looking at things, we have different experiences as well. So we are much more focusing actually in trying to identify ourselves. What is really our identity? uh, do we really hold into the colonial perspective, or do we create our own narratives as well? So we are seeing different things in the present. So we will try to see kung, what we consider as something that can be beneficial for us, and especially in the creation of our identity as people or the community.
Okay. All right, and I have a question here intended for Dr. Sison. I think this is from still from Jesse Varquez. Thank you for your lecture. I'm interested in the pre-colonial understanding of leprosy, which you have pointed out as a divine punishment. Do you have data or information about how people back then treated or dealt with leprosy before the advent of contemporary biomedical discoveries and interventions? And the other one is whether these pre-colonial treatment or dealing with leprosy persisted today. Dr. Sison, I think it's the mix. Okay.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much, Jesse, for your wonderful question. My basis for saying the divine punishment, this was actually from the text in the book that I had pointed out about, it was about a book on leprosy. The source of this were from the early Spanish colonizers or friars who had described one that leprosy was rather prevalent during the time. In fact, they would actually describe people with leprosy. First of all, you have to understand, people with leprosy during the time would be very much scarred. They would have particular lesions on the face. They may lose certain fingers. So this was very disturbing for anybody. That's why, as I mentioned in my lecture, the we and the us. And during the time, they had no clue why this was happening. The concept of it being an infectious disease was totally absent. So they had thought that this was because of a divine intervention, because of them perhaps killing a Spanish friars. There was a very interesting interplay between the coming of Christianity and the treatment from leprosy. Now, going back to pre-colonial, a lot of the treatments then were plant and herbal, but what was quite prevalent is that the Spanish authorities then had described that most of the people with leprosy and presumably advanced leprosy were segregated. So you see, they were either abandoned, segregated, and in one particular place, they were actually abandoned to an island similar to Colon. It was probably like a precursor for that. And they described seeing about 500 lepers, people with leprosy there. So these were the reasons for the segregation, but the reasons were not medical. The reasons were because they were being punished And I don't want, for some reason, maybe the punishment might be contagious. With regards, are this still being practiced today? I think that's a wonderful question. One of my interests would be actually the indigenous people, and I had actually visited the community of Itas in Pampanga. And because I'm also a dermatologist, I had asked for possible psoriasis, and they were mentioning there were some people, because remember this is a small community, and I was, just asking a question, do you, any of you would have any skin problems? And one of my differentials, which I wasn't able to follow up, I suspect one of them may actually have leprosy based on the history. Now, remember, this is suspect case. I am unclear. And what that happened is because of the deformities, he's actually living in a hut, segregated, and given food. So perhaps to answer your questions, they still practice that. And I am unclear whether they work on a biomedical framework of the segregation, or they feel maybe this is maybe not a supernatural cause of the skin disease. I cannot answer that. But this is the best information that I have with my little exposure with the Ita people in Pampanga. Thank you, Andrew.
All right, thank you for that, Dr. Sison. And I think the next question is from Betchay, and this is intended for Ms. Batilles. That during the presentation, it was discussed that there are ethical concerns in production of Muscovado. I'd like to know more about it. Can you elaborate on that? Thank you. The ethical part.
Ethical concerns, let me check, sir, huh? What do you think? Oh, I think that has something to do with, I think that has something to do with fair trade.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, that has something to do with fair trade because, again, currently part of the global trend is that people, especially from developed countries, they are quite concerned about where their products are coming from. So in comes the fair trade, wherein they are really trying to make sure that the products that the people will be using are actually not product of slavery, not product coming from suspicious ethical practices. So basically, people in Antique right now that are actually trying to follow the fair trade, they're actually trying to put it into practice as well, that they're following that the product is organic, that the products are really undergone rigorous, what you call this, following of the rules and regulations. So again, the ethical concern there has something to do with the environment, and as well as the fairness that like for example, the farmer will be compensated properly by the amount of the money that he will get from his product. That has something to do with the ethical concern that my study is actually looking into.
And everything is given fair based
Yeah,
on
yeah.
all right. And I think this is for Dr. Sison again. Regarding persistence of leprosy in Colyon po, it was mentioned in Robin's GenPath book that administration of BCG can offer protection from development of leprosy since microbacterium po siya. I would just like to know if childhood vaccination is crucial to stop the spread or occurrence of leprosy in the area. Or do we have statistics po on the BCG vaccination ng mga tao po sa Colyon and nearby areas from special.
Okay, that's a wonderfully complicated question. Okay, just from the very start, TB is caused the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which causes TB, and Mycobacterium leprae causes leprosy. They belong to the same genus of bacilli. So that is perhaps where it's coming from, because both of them are bacteria. Now, the question is posits. One, if you're given vaccination for tuberculosis, will that protect you from leprosy, because presumably they would come, it's the same class of bacteria. I am not very familiar with this particular angle, so I don't feel I can give you a sound medical opinion regarding this. I do understand the possibility of maybe cross reaction as well, and maybe so. Also, I also want to say that one, Culion Island is considered leprosy free now. It is not anymore a leper colony. During the American Commonwealth, it is called the island of no more return, because remember, during the time there was no treatment, so those with leprosy were banished there and would never be able. They chose that island because it's difficult. They can easily monitor through the boat who can go and who can leave. So it was for a time a very notorious island that once you go there, you cannot leave. Furthermore, during the time in Colon, there were two states. One, obviously, is the colony and the non-infected states. And did you know they even have their own currency during that particular time? But one thing I could say now, that as I had mentioned in my lecture, the treatment from leprosy is really medication. But unfortunately, this medication will need to be taken 6 months, 1 year, or for some patients, more than a year. And that is where I think it becomes problematic, because one, especially the pandemic, maybe the availability of this three antibiotic therapy as well. That is basically what is done now. Um, I have always asked as well leprosy experts, why do we have it so much? Because historically in the States, they say they get this from an armadillo, which I don't think we have, or if ever. And we do also see leprosy not just in the rural areas, but also in the city. But of course, in the city, it is because they got it from somebody with close contact. Perhaps in the rural areas, because of going to the forest, they probably may get it there. But I think the way to go is really information, better education. I'm sorry I cannot answer directly about the BCG. I'll look it up, and hopefully next time I will inform you. Thank you so much for that question.
All right, thank you so much also, Dr. Stone, for such an information. And now the next question is intended to Ayan Rios. This is from Romeo Turin. There seems to be similar stories about Maria Cacao from other places with other caves, especially in the Visayas, maybe in the Philippines. Can you talk more about what you have found out so far about these parallelism? Also, do you think the story of having enchanted cave maiden could also have any connection to the popular religious devotion of the Virgin of Lourdes who appeared in a grotto? Yan?
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sir?
Yan. Yes, yes.
Okay. Hi, Myung. Thank you for that question. It's a wonderful one. Yes, the legend or the tale of the legend of Maria Cacao is very popular, at least in Cebu. It's all over the island of Cebu. And what's more interesting is that it varies geographically. No, sa asang lugar, they have their own version. You have their own version of the Hulmanan. You have your own version of the Maria Cacao. It is very there's what they call the cultural variations. And regarding the Virgin Lourdes regarding the Virgin of the Lourdes who appeared in the grotto, I think I'll have to look into that more often. So that's all.
All right, thank you, Yan. And I think Dr. Amper have another question for you. Explain how beliefs in the supernatural have persisted, especially in the uplands, despite in the imposition of Catholic beliefs since the Spanish colonization until today. How has the COVID-19 pandemic, which has placed restrictions on church activities and rituals, helped in revitalizing local rituals and beliefs in the supernatural?
All right. So I'll answer the first question of Ma'am Ding. So how beliefs in the supernatural have persisted in the uplands?
Okay.
I don't think I can actually answer the question because my data was very limited. But in my opinion, maybe because the Spanish was more into the poblacion. They don't. I don't know. Maybe lang. Ako lang opinion. No? And they don't go into the mountains. So it's not really accessible before than it's now. So maybe there's geographical boundary or a barrier. But now it's more accessible than it was before. And regarding
Yan, are you still there? I think due to some technical difficulties, Ayan been frozen. So let me just proceed to this last question. And this is intended for Idol Paul Bilamide. Sir, you still there?
Yes, sir, I'm still here.
Okay, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
A question from Dr. Ampere. How have the introduced science-based techniques affected local practices of the Boholanos since the American colonial period until now? And then, is there any documentation on such local agricultural practices prior to the introduction of the science-based techniques?
Good afternoon, Dr. Amper. First, is there any documentation on such local agricultural practices prior to prior to the introduction of science-based techniques? Wonderfully, we can find documentation of local agricultural practices of Boholanos in magazines published by the Bureau of Agriculture. One of this magazine is titled Philippine Agricultural Review, and editions can be downloaded from the internet. One essay that I read about this was written by E.F. Southwick. It's a report on agricultural condition of Bohol. But aside from providing statistics about the production of crops, it also provides us a comprehensive account on how Boholanos cultivated major crops such as palay, abaca, coconuts, and even maguey. There's another article on abaca and maguey, which is a more comprehensive account on cultivation of abaca and maguey in the island. Aside from the Philippine Agricultural Review, we can also look at the report of the Philippine Commission, and that can also be downloaded from the internet. It also provides accounts, although briefly on how Boholanos cultivated agricultural crops. In terms of the effect of science-based techniques on local practices, I think the colonial state was able to affect the production system of Boholanos because of its persistent teaching through model farms and publications. One of the, as I mentioned in my lecture, one of the practice that the colonial state encouraged amongst farmers of Bohol was the use of cattle instead of carabao. Before the Americans came, the draft animal being used by Boholanos was cow. But since there was a lack of cows during that time because of one, winter pests, number two, because of war, what the Americans did was they encouraged the use of cattle instead. So it was mentioned concretely, specifically in that account, that the Bureau of Agriculture were able to encourage the farmers of Bohol to use cows instead of carabao.
All right, thank you for that, Mr. Blamide, for such an information. And just to time check, guys, it's already 4:19. So, and I think there's no more questions regarding this matter. And in behalf of the Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao, I would like to thank all the speakers, Mr. Idel Paul G. Bilamide for presenting the Bohol agriculture during the American occupation innovations and responses, which basically tells us or informs us regarding the Boholanos in turn incorporated the colonial technologies into their centuries-old agricultural system in their attempt to ensure the sustenance and improve the standard of living. And then from Ms. Christine S. Batiles, from local to global, the globalization of Antiques Muscovado, which tells us on how, or the focus of the study describing how globalization helped revive Antiques' declining Muscovado sugar industry, and the literature, observations, and personal experiences and discussion with the producers revealed that Muscovado's popularity outside the province among locals is due to the trend of healthier sweeteners. And then Mr. Ian Del Rios presented the Mangao and the Mount Lantoy, the unseen treasures of Argao in Cebu, which the main part of the paper briefly documents the cultural significance of Mangao as embedded in the local folklore of the farming community well within the Mount Lantoy key biodiversity area. And then last but not the least, the presentation of Dr. Antonio C. Sison revisiting the Hansen's disease, leprosy from the Spanish colonial, the American Commonwealth, and the COVID-19 pandemic. So this presentation that Dr. Sison presented, the stringent process of curing leprosy and the diversity in how people have changed and adapted the continuous health concern regarding the leprosy. So good afternoon, and in behalf of the Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao, I would like to thank all the presenters for such comprehensive information given to us and to all the participants. Thank you and good afternoon.
Maraming
Thank
salamat
you.
po.
Thank you.
Daghang salamat.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Salamat, salamat.
Thank you.
So that was a wonderful discussion from the very beginning during session A and up until session B. And we are very thankful for everyone who actually stayed with us with the two sessions. And we're very much excited to be with you again online for the other sessions that will start at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So all of you who are interested to join us via Zoom, you can already access the Zoom link as early as 8 a.m. We are also encouraging or inviting everyone to actually join us and become an UGAT member. I'm just gonna share my screen for a while so that for everyone's information, the Ugnayang Pang-Aghamtao is really looking forward to have new members and participate in several different activities hosted by the UGAT, especially the General Assembly. So if you are interested in becoming a member, you can contact us or send us an email or visit our website for details, www.ugat-aghamtao.org. If you've decided to actually join UGAT, we are going to have a general assembly tomorrow afternoon after the last session. And once again, that's it for day one. We hope to see you again on day two tomorrow at 8 a.m.
No group photo?
We hope that you'll keep on
Group photo daw, Reg.
Group photo for documentation.
Doon daw ang mga cam.
We would like to request everyone to turn on your microphone, your cameras for the picture taking.
The 200-day moving average line is trending up for at least 1 month.
Okay. Ooh. Some familiar faces, lots of new faces. Hello, maayong hapon.
Si Sir Dennis, sinigdans niyo di ay.
Okay. Ma'am Dean, kinsay mag screenshot? Walang?
Makakita standard. Ikaw lang, Reg.
Okay, sige. How about the other?
Ibalhin lang sa pikas. Ikuman.
Okay. Actually, we only have 2 panels. So, carry. Sige. All right. Athena, are you still there? And very, very quick photo. Murag, busy siguro si Miss Athena. Okay, go ahead. 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay, next panel. Ooh, lots of people who haven't opened their cameras. Hello, nice to see your faces.
Wala ni sila.
Okay. Wala na eh. Apas.
Wala man ni sila.
Natug mo.
Walay camera.
Mga sir, mga ma'am, humana ang session na to. Mata na ta. Just kidding. Okay. Hello? Hello, mga people. Sige. Wala, ma'am, di mo busy
Vince
pa si
Mayo, Audrey, Fatima, Kate, Jocelyn, Bonifacio, Julius, Bradley,
Marjorie.
Marjorie, Trina, Queenie.
Ma'am Queenie. Asa naman ka, Ma'am Queenie?
Ayun. Og ni sila guro. Or why camera?
Abasin wala sila yung camera. Naka-mobile phone guro na guba ang camera.
Lang.
Okay, sige.
At least ay
Ready na lang. Sige, for those who turn on their cameras. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. One more. 3.
Pusing ako sa si Myong din.
Anan si Myo?
Sige, go.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Kita-kits
See you tomorrow.
para sa day 2 sa ato.
Thank you.
Amping.
Sorry ha, kay walay libre panihapon. Inyo na lang counterpart na lang yung panihapon.
Mag-send na lang daw ko na photos, suggested snacks.
Pwede man ipa-deliver diri, ma'am.
Wow.
Ay, salig ka na nakaslapo-lapo ha.
Ito, no?
Sige, bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
There are areas where the path forests and plateaus forbid.
Daghan nang na-busy, Jud. Bukan na ta, mga ma'am, mga sir. See you tomorrow.